The outbreak of the First World War, 1914. The year 1914 opened like any other in Europe, but by August it had collapsed into catastrophe. The First World War, which would consume tens of millions of lives, erupted through a chain of political miscalculations, diplomatic failures, and military mobilizations. It was not a war that anyone single-handedly willed into being, but one that slipped into place as old alliances locked like gears, each turning the next until the entire continent was dragged into the abyss. The spark in Sarajevo. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist tied to the secret society known as the Black Hand. For Austria-Hungary, the murder was more than an attack on its royal family. It was a blow to its prestige and a challenge to its authority in the volatile Balkans. In Vienna, the assassination became the pretext for settling accounts with Serbia, which Austria accused of harboring conspirators and stoking pan-Slavic agitation. The Austro-Hungarian leadership, particularly Chief of Staff Konrad von Hotzendorf and Foreign Minister Leopold von Berchtold, urged that Serbia be crushed once and for all. The July Crisis. The weeks after the assassination became known as the July Crisis. At its heart was Austria-Hungary's decision to seek backing from its powerful ally, Germany. On July 5–6, 1914, Austrian envoys traveled to Berlin, where they received the infamous blank cheque from Kaiser Wilhelm II and Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg. Germany promised unconditional support to Austria-Hungary, regardless of how far it chose to go against Serbia. With this guarantee, Austria-Hungary delivered its harsh ultimatum to Serbia on July 23. The ultimatum demanded sweeping concessions, including allowing Austrian officials to participate in Serbian judicial proceedings, terms designed to be unacceptable. Serbia, however, accepted most demands, offering compromise on others. Still, Austria-Hungary, determined to punish, rejected the reply. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Shells soon fell on Belgrade, and the Balkan conflict began. But within days, the war widened far beyond Vienna's calculations. The dominoes fall. Declarations of war. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavic nations and tied to Serbia by cultural and political sympathies, began mobilizing on July 30. The Russian mobilization was not only about Serbia, it was a direct response to Austrian aggression and to Germany's looming support. For the German General Staff, particularly Helmut von Moltke the Younger, Russian mobilization meant war. The German war plan, the Schlieffen Plan, required swift action. Germany could not afford to wait for Russia's enormous army to fully mobilize. The plan demanded an immediate strike through Belgium into France, to eliminate one opponent before turning east. On August 1, Germany declared war on Russia. 2 days later, on August 3, Germany declared war on France. That same day, German troops crossed into neutral Belgium, violating its guaranteed neutrality under the 1839 Treaty of London. This move, meant to be a lightning thrust, would transform the war into a global conflict. Britain, bound by treaty to defend Belgium and determined to prevent German domination of Western Europe, delivered an ultimatum to Berlin. When it was ignored, Britain declared war on Germany on August 4. The lamps, as British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey famously remarked, were going out all over Europe. The first military engagements, the very first shots of the war, were not fired in Europe, but in Africa. On August 7, French and British colonial troops attacked the German colony of Togoland. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Germans struck at Liège, Belgium, on August 5-7. The fortress city was heavily defended, but German heavy artillery, most famously the massive Krupp and Skoda siege guns, reduced its forts one by one. The fall of Liège shocked the world. Belgium had been seen as militarily insignificant, but its resistance delayed the German timetable and became a rallying cry for Allied propaganda. Plucky little Belgium. Other early clashes included Austro-Hungarian skirmishes against Serbia, where the Austrians were repelled at the Battle of Silla, August 12-24. In East Prussia, Russian forces invaded earlier than expected, leading to the pivotal Battle of Tannenberg, August 26-30, where the Germans, under Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, annihilated a Russian army. These first battles revealed the scale of the conflict. The war was already continental in scope. The key political players at the center of decision-making were leaders often blinded by pride, fear, and outdated assumptions. Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II vacillated between bluster and indecision. His chancellor, Bethmann Hollweg, tried to manage events but ultimately tied Germany to Austria's reckless course. The military, dominated by the General Staff, pressed relentlessly for war. Austria-Hungary. Emperor Franz Joseph, old and weary, deferred much to his ministers. Foreign Minister Berchtold and Chief of Staff Conrad drove the empire toward confrontation with Serbia. Russia. Tsar Nicholas II, influenced by his ministers and his cousin Kaiser Wilhelm, found himself torn between backing down and protecting Serbia. His generals insisted mobilization was unavoidable. France. President Raymond Poincaré and Premier René Viviani stood firmly by Russia. France's alliance commitments were clear, and they viewed Germany as the aggressor. Britain. Prime Minister H.H. Asquith and Foreign Secretary Edward Grey agonized over entering the war. But once Belgium was invaded, British neutrality was impossible. Germany's attitude to war. In Germany, the outbreak of war was met with a wave of patriotic enthusiasm. Crowds cheered in Berlin, Vienna, and other cities. Newspapers declared that Germany was encircled by enemies and must fight for survival. The Social Democratic Party, SPD, long an opponent of militarism, stunned many by voting for war credits in the Reichstag, proclaiming, "We will not abandon the fatherland in its hour of danger." The moment of Bergfrieden, domestic truce, seemed to unite all Germans behind the Kaiser. Yet beneath the surface, the mood was more complex. Some Germans feared the consequences of a continental war. Businessmen worried about disruption, workers about hardship. But the intoxicating blend of nationalism, discipline, and faith in the might of the German army created a belief that the war would be short and victorious. The Allies. Unity or suspicion. Among the Allies, Russia, France, and Britain, there was unity in opposing German aggression, but suspicion lingered. France worried that Russia's mobilization would be slow and ineffective. Russia doubted British resolve, suspecting London might remain aloof. Britain, meanwhile, entered reluctantly, anxious about its global empire and hesitant to commit fully to continental warfare. Nevertheless, Germany's invasion of Belgium fused their interests. Britain's entry was decisive in framing the war as one of aggression versus defense. Belgian resistance, though militarily limited, provided moral legitimacy to the Allied cause. By mid-August, despite doubts and misgivings, the Entente was aligned against the Central Powers. Germany's invasion of Belgium. The German war plan was bold but ruthless. Count Alfred von Schlieffen, the architect, had envisioned a massive right-wing sweep through Belgium to encircle Paris and crush France in 6 weeks. Belgium's neutrality was dismissed as a minor obstacle. When King Albert of Belgium refused German demands for free passage, the Germans unleashed their army. The assault on Liège was followed by the systematic advance across the Meuse. The German army, the most formidable in the world, moved with mechanical precision. Yet Belgian resistance, though ultimately doomed, slowed the timetable. The Belgians also destroyed bridges and railways, complicating German logistics. The invasion brought scenes of horror. Civilians were massacred in towns like Louvain, where the ancient university library was burned. German troops, convinced that Belgian civilians were sniping at them, responded with brutal reprisals. Such atrocities shocked global opinion and hardened resistance against Germany. What Berlin had expected to be a lightning passage became a moral disaster. Conclusion. The world on fire. By September 1914, Europe was engulfed in a war larger and more terrible than any imagined. The declarations of war had transformed the Balkan crisis into a global conflagration. The earliest engagements, Liège, Sia, Tannenberg, revealed the ferocity of the conflict. Political leaders had unleashed forces they could no longer control, while soldiers and civilians alike braced for a storm that would last not 6 weeks but more than 4 years. Germany's invasion of Belgium set the tone, ruthless efficiency mixed with miscalculation. The Allies, though mistrustful at first, were bound together by outrage at German aggression. In Germany, enthusiasm masked the grim realities ahead. The war that began in 1914 was not merely a clash of armies, it was the collapse of an entire European order, replaced by the bloodiest struggle the world had yet seen.